مرحبا سيداتي السافرة. مساء الخير في بولندا، صباح الخير في أمريكا. Unfortunately, my Arabic is not as great as it used to be, or as good as I wish it would have been. So I will continue in English if you allow me. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to the UNA Poland discussion series for what is now our 26th episode. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start off with something that is very recent and very relevant to today's occurrences on the international arena, and that is the recent agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. The UAE, after Egypt and Jordan, is now the third country to fully recognize Israel, and just recently we've heard of the first commercial flight between the two countries. And I just wanted to ask you about the significance of this for the region in more general terms. I am aware how difficult this was. I've lived in the Middle East for approximately 10 years, so I'm very well aware of the different arrangements there are. But do you see that other countries will follow suit, or is this such a complicated issue that we shouldn't expect as much in due time?
Well, thank you, Adam. And I'd just like to say at the outset that everything that we do as a country in our foreign policy is about increasing stability in our region. And I think the peace accord with Israel is really a historic step. And it is in this direction of creating a more stable regional order. Our ambition and the ambition for our people is a peaceful, a tolerant, a prosperous Middle East. And I think that's what this peace accord with Israel signifies. And of course, as part of the discussions with Israel and the United States, we managed to discuss suspension of annexation of the West Bank. And I think this was also a major achievement and provides the space and time for the Israelis and the Palestinians, who are the two main parties who need to negotiate any final settlement of their pending issues, with the support of the international community, to come to a just and lasting settlement. So I think that issue of annexation was really also an important part of the opportunity that we saw in normalization of relations. But beyond that issue, which again is part and parcel of any final negotiation between the two sides, beyond that, I think that a relationship between, you said you spent time in our region and you will know the UAE well, but a relationship between two of the most, two of the advanced and two forward-thinking countries in the region is really quite exciting in terms of the opportunities that will create. So we are envisioning cooperation on a range of industries and activities. I think that opportunities for science, culture, educational exchange, tackling the pandemic, COVID-19, all of this has the greatest potential to positively impact our region and should be welcomed by everyone in our region. So, for example, commercial agreements are already being signed between Emirati and Israeli companies to cooperate on research and development related to COVID-19, a challenge that the entire human race is facing. So I do want to emphasize that I think this is a diplomatic agreement that is a win-win for the region. It's in particular a win-win for the youth of our region who are hoping to look to the future, to look to opportunities in our part of the world, and to move forward in terms of what we can achieve, creating opportunities for all. In terms of other countries in the region, I can't comment to those. You need to ask those countries, but I think that you will see that there has been a broadly welcoming of this accord regionally, and definitely a welcoming of this accord internationally and in a bipartisan way in the United States. And of course, in terms of the Arab position, we as the UAE continue to maintain our steadfast support to the Palestinians, as well as the international consensus regarding a two-state solution. And in many ways, we hope that this new channel of cooperation, of decreasing tension in our regions will help create space for that process as well. So I think that it's a positive net for us as a country, and it could be that other countries in the region follow suit at some point, but that is a sovereign decision for those countries. And we've realized that you can really do those two things at the same time. You can have a commitment to the Palestinian issue and to the international consensus around the two-state solution and the borders of 1967, and the Arab League position, the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. You can do that and have a bilateral relationship with a country that is a big part of our region today, and develop opportunities in those spaces. So I think that's what we have done as a country.
Well, I think it's definitely a milestone, that's for sure, and I'm very hopeful for the future. And I was very excited to hear about this, and I do hope, and I think that is also the general feeling, as you mentioned, of the youth as well. And I think the outlook for the future is hopefully looking good. This sort of ties in with my next question. I mean, this definitely shows that dialogue, debate, diplomacy, those are still very, very relevant in today's globalized world. And I wanted to ask you, with reference to the fact that we're celebrating 75 years of the UN this year, would you say that this is a good time to come back to the discussion on the reform of the United Nations? And if so, what direction should we take in that case? I mean, in more general terms, what is the role of the UN in today's 21st century?
So, Adam, it's clear that, this year we're celebrating the UN's 75th anniversary, and the multilateral system is facing many, many challenges on a number of issues. The UN is always described as something that is independent to the geopolitical reality around it. That is not the case. The UN reflects the world as it is today, and that world has become more polarized and is struggling to deal with global issues such as climate change, terrorism, all the things, gender parity, all the things that we need to unite on are becoming areas of increasing polarization. COVID-19 has clearly also exacerbated these challenges, and it's really reminded us that multilateral organizations are only as strong as its member states want them to be. And this is really a truth of all time since the UN was founded. However, of course, we must not lose sight of the fact at the same time that a huge number of people depend on this system, depend on the multilateral system. And these are people, the most vulnerable, affected by conflict, affected by climate change, affected by the natural disasters and man-made disasters and war. And it's really up to us and up to the people in the organizations such as the one that you serve in to ensure that the UN is held accountable, that it continues to work to meet these challenges of the 21st century. You've mentioned that the reform of the Security Council, which is one of the long overdue reform initiatives that I've had the honor of co-facilitating for 3 consecutive years. And the last one with my dear colleague Ambassador Joanna Franeska of Poland. And she and I did our level best to have constructive and transparent dialogue between member states about the future reform of the Security Council. But it is really not easy to get 193 states, 5 of whom have veto power, behind a proposal that would address everyone's concerns and be satisfactory to everyone. That is almost an impossible task. It doesn't mean we should give up on it, because I think the Security Council should reflect more the world as it is today, rather than the one that was forged in the aftermath of World War II. But it does mean that we have to work harder in trying to ensure that the Security Council is both fit for purpose in the 21st century and beyond, and also representative of the new geopolitical realities. So in many ways, it's an important process. But if I'm speaking to you frankly, I think we have some larger issues today in terms of the effectiveness of the Security Council because of this polarization that I mentioned at the beginning. And now is the time to really recommit ourselves to multilateralism, to working together, to forging consensus over the areas that we can agree on, rather than focusing on our differences.
I think you do indeed touch upon some really crucial issues there, and I think the aspect of accountability is indeed something that has been talked about and researched by scholars for a number of years now. And I very much appreciate your words on the role of NGOs and such bodies that they do have a role to play here as well. 2020 is a year of anniversaries. Next to UN 75, we're also celebrating the 5th anniversary of the adoption of Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I wanted to ask you about sustainable development in the United Arab Emirates. I mean, I know that there were several different projects, such as the integrated energy programs. There was, as far as I remember, a special program on sustainable schools. As far as, for instance, the SDG 1, I've read recently the UAE is doing particularly well on that one and on SDG 17, so partnership for the goals. But I was just wondering if you could share some practical examples of the agenda's implementation in the UAE with our listeners.
Absolutely. So the UAE has a national committee comprising the 15 federal government agencies that have a stake in this. And I think that's an important coordinating mechanism. And for us, effective SDG implementation really needs this whole of government approach. You can't just put it under the remit of a foreign ministry or a different ministry. I think it needs a whole of government approach. And so our committee is responsible for the national implementation of the SDGs and is holding us all the entities accountable in our commitments. So it's monitoring, it's reporting progress towards SDG targets and stakeholder engagement. It also aligns national development plans, including Vision 2021 and the UAE Green Growth Strategy with the SDGs. So all our strategies are aligned. And according to the 2019 Arab Region SDG Index, the UAE was actually one of only 5 countries in the MENA region with a total score of 65 or above, meaning that it's 2/3 of the way to achieving the SDGs. Now, of course, the challenge for everyone is making sure that the impact of the pandemic on lives and livelihoods does not reverse these decades of progress. So if we think about climate change, for example, it's both a domestic and foreign policy priority for the UAE. And I think we hope other countries see it in that vein as well. We're a country that's particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, and we're also one of the world's largest producers of fossil fuels. So within the framework of the SDGs, there are really some major initiatives underway at home to mitigate the impact of climate change, including reducing the cost of renewable energy, as well as investing in vertical farming to enhance food security. So we're really proud to have also begun work early on diversifying our energy sources, and we've built the first nuclear power plant in the Arab world, constructed using a real gold standard for civilian nuclear power and non-proliferation, so no uranium enrichment. And we also have the most concrete and ambitious UN commitment on climate change in the Arab world, which includes having 44% of our energy mix come from renewables and a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And I would just basically say that for us, the SDGs are the organizing principle of our development and humanitarian aid as well. So we're one of the most generous donors in the world in terms of aid as a percentage of GNI. And we consistently rank among the top 6 largest humanitarian donors in absolute terms. So for example, we recently partnered with the World Food Programme to ship vital supplies to address the global impact of the pandemic, and we were the first responder early on. We've given COVID-19 assistance to over 100 countries to date, all completely in line with the SDG objective, of course, of ending hunger and achieving food security and building resilient societies. I'd say another example of how we promote SDG implementation is in our international convenings. World Expo in Dubai will be one of the most important upcoming moments of global solidarity and will take place between October 2021 and March 2022. And of course, you will be invited, and I hope you'll come back to visit us in the Middle East and in Dubai at that point. And I think it will be a unique space for sharing ideas, piloting new solutions, supporting the advancement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There will be a Global Goals Week, a high-profile segment of Expo dedicated to the SDGs. And the idea is to make every visitor into an SDG champion through citizen engagement. And so that's really one of the key goals of Expo 2020 in Dubai, and I hope you and your colleagues will join us there for that.
With pleasure. I think another example here is the Urban Forum, which was held in the UAE just recently. And in 2022, it'll be held here in Poland in Katowice. So there's another really close relation between the two countries. I do want to move on to something which is very close to home. Poland, along with several other countries, are really fighting with aging populations. It's becoming really an increasing issue, increasing problem. We see statistics which say that in 2060, 2065, the pension of those who are entering the labor market at the moment will only be 25% of their current pay, whereas at the moment it's roughly around 60%. On the other hand, we have the Middle East and North Africa region, where approximately 50% of the population is beyond the age of 25. They're younger than 25. And what, in your eyes, can we do, can the global community do, in order to materialize and utilize this extreme potential in order to better face today's challenges that the world faces? And there are many of those.
Yes, absolutely. And look, let me just first say that youth is absolutely a priority file in the UAE, and that's why we champion that file at the UN as well. The specific concerns of youth regarding economic opportunities, political participation, climate change, and all other issues really need to be addressed holistically and integrated into our policymaking process. So as you've mentioned, we share this challenge with you. It's a particularly important file in the Middle East and North Africa. And for us, 2/3 of the population are under the age of 35. Unemployment for those under 24 years old is over 25%. Nearly half of them are women, including many with university degrees. And according to the World Bank, the Middle East is the only region in the world where the risks of unemployment increases as levels of education increase, which is just a staggering data point. And so really, in order to address this phenomenon effectively, first of all, as in the UAE, we take the principle that you can't second guess youth. They must be an integral part of your decision-making process. They have to be empowered to decide the kinds of opportunities they want to pursue and be provided the training that is better suited to their needs and to the opportunities in the job market. So in the UAE, we launched the Arab Youth Opportunities Platform, linking young people with local, regional, and global institutions that offer them opportunities to fulfill their hopes and dreams. And I think we must be doing something right, because for the last 8 years, the UAE is ranked first in the Arab Youth Survey as the country where most Arab youth would like to live and work. And I think it's because of the opportunities that we provide as a country for youth around the region and the world. And we really also believe that it's important to include youth voices and perspectives when we discuss these global challenges. So for example, 4 years ago, we appointed a then 22-year-old woman as our first minister for youth to ensure that youth concerns and needs are at the center of government action, so right in our cabinet. And I think we're one of the only countries that had a youth minister at the actual age of what would be classified as youth, and I think that was a big step change. And at the UN, the UAE's included youth in all of our delegations, our annual delegation to the UN General Assembly. As part of the UN Youth Delegates Program, we've placed a particular focus on youth in the context of global counterterrorism efforts. We really believe that in order to counter the spread of extremist ideologies, we have to continue prioritizing education and the creation of economic opportunities for youth. So I would say this is one of the prime issues of our time, of our region, and globally. And I think that potentially with the impacts of COVID-19 on our global economy and the opportunities for youth that are going to be decimated by our failure to respond as a global community, the stakes are too high for us not to work together collectively to ensure that doesn't happen. So very much a priority platform for us.
I think that's a great example that you mentioned there about the cabinet minister. I think that's something pretty much unheard of in other parts of the world, in other countries. So that's something that is indeed very, very impressive. The Injas Al Arab Young Entrepreneurs Competition, that's also something that I look very closely at, particularly in the time when I lived in the region. So there are several different examples, I think, that to be proud of, simply put. I am looking at the clock, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, so I will move on to my last question. And this pertains to indeed the role of women in the geopolitical setting, but also the ceiling, the glass ceiling that has been talked about for years now. In 2017, you were the president of UN Women, and I wanted to ask you from that perspective, but also from your experiences as the UAE's ambassador and permanent representative to the UN, where do you think we are today as far as women empowerment is concerned, and as far as fighting with that famous glass ceiling? Where do you think we are, and what do you think the future looks like?
Well, look, I think that it's clear that there has been much progress, and it is clear that the business case, the moral case, the political case for gender parity has been made and is very clearly in the minds of policymakers around the world today. But the gap still remains, I think the gap still remains too wide. And we need to be honest with ourselves and understand the policy decisions that we need to take in order to close that gap. And we already know that if we were to allow the gap to close organically, from various studies that have been undertaken, that it would take over 100 years to close it. And given that we also know that trillions of dollars could be added to the global economy if we close the gender gap, and given, as I mentioned earlier, the potential impact of COVID-19 on the global economy, it's clear that we can't waste any more time in ensuring that gender equality is really front and center of all of our government policy. And I think we've been doing that in the UAE. So I think in the UAE, some of the practical steps we've taken that have made sure that I think, are a leader in our region on this file is that, first of all, equality is enshrined in our constitution. And I think making sure that the legal basis of your society is one that empowers women as well as men is the first step to take. We also act on the policy principle that women's participation in all aspects of society is critical, whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's in our judiciary and police force and our military. So, for example, women make up 44% of our workforce, and 70% of our university graduates are women. And we're also a gender champion at the UN. So you mentioned I was the president of UN Women, but we've been a core contributor to UN Women since its establishment in 2010. We've contributed almost $40 million in the past decade to their work globally. And I think the UN's role is particularly important in developing this normative framework, as we call it here in New York, which means creating the framework that countries understand as international best practice around the topic of gender empowerment. And at the same time, not lecturing, not coming from a moral pulpit of preaching, but rather building capacity, understanding the challenges, encouraging countries to prioritize this issue in their domestic policy. And so that's really one of our core priorities at the UN, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which not only focuses on increasing women's participation politically, but the WPS agenda specifically focuses in increasing women's participation in conflict prevention, peacekeeping, post-conflict reconstruction, and peace building. And so we know already the data on this. Many institutes have done studies that, for example, in peace processes, when women participate, they're much more likely to last longer and be more durable than women are not around that peace negotiation table. And so I think that's really why it's such a core part of our foreign policy as well. And some of the ways we've been trying to help others in the region commit to that goal. For example, a couple of years ago, our Ministry of Defense, UN Women, and the General Women's Union in our country launched a Women, Peace and Security training program in Abu Dhabi, which really aims to increase the number of female military officers, particularly in peacekeeping fields, as well as provide training and capacity building opportunities. And so far, we've seen more than 400 cadets from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East graduate from that program. So, I think this is a priority for us. It's why we're a leader in this field, and proud to be a leader in this field. And I think I need to emphasize here that you can't make these changes without women. So the diplomatic corps at the UN continues to be a male-dominated world. Only 25% of my fellow ambassadors are women. Although at the UAE mission to the UN, it's the other way around. The majority of my diplomatic team are women, 7 out of 10, including my deputy ambassador. And the men often tell me they feel outnumbered and occasionally marginalized. But I think it's a work in progress. I think we can all do more to ensure parity, to ensure that gender empowerment is really something that we all commit to, not only in word, but also in deed, in our lives and our daily working lives around us. And I hope that others also commit to that, because as I said, the business case, the moral case, the political case, that book has already been written. We know the outcome, we know the story, how it ends when women are an equal part of our society, and it's a good story.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for sharing your time with us, and indeed your thoughts and your experiences. It was an absolute delight, a great pleasure and honor to have been able to have this conversation with you. I think you really do touch upon some really important issues, and I very much thank you for giving us so many practical examples, because I think that is something that can be taken away from this discussion. So again, thank you very much. I wish you all the very, very best to you and the entire team at the mission.
Thank you, Adam. My pleasure, and stay safe and be well.